Most people think their 50s are the beginning of the end of work, a slow wind down, a waiting room for retirement. But that belief is exactly what destroys them financially. Because your 50s are not the runway. They're the final checkpoint where everything you built either holds or breaks. And most people arrive here thinking time is still on their side. It isn't. At this stage, small financial decisions stop being small. They become permanent. There's no long recovery window left. What you have built is what you will likely carry forward. And yet, most people continue living like nothing has changed. That delay is what creates the last decade trap. It doesn't happen through one mistake. It happens through decades of small assumptions that were never corrected. Assumptions like, I'll fix my savings later, or my expenses will sort themselves out. But they don't sort themselves out. They harden, and by your 50s, they become your financial structure. That is why this decade is not about planning anymore. It is about reality checking, because what feels like stability is often just delayed pressure. And the goal now is not to build something perfect. It is to avoid collapse. If you're still here, subscribe, because what comes next will challenge how you think about your entire financial life. And I want you to comment one word right now that describes your current situation: stable, unsure, pressured, or rebuilding. Now let's go deeper. Most people in their 50s are living inside what I call the false safety illusion. It feels like progress, a house, some savings, maybe a pension plan. So the brain says, you're fine. But that feeling is not math. It's emotion. And emotion is dangerous in finance because the real numbers tell a different story. A small retirement balance often generates far less income than people expect, which means even responsible savers discover too late that their safety was only partial. Not enough to truly stop working, not enough to handle shocks, just enough to feel safe until reality tests it. And this is where people split into two groups. One group stays comfortable and delays action. The other becomes uncomfortable and adjusts immediately. And that small difference compounds into a massive gap over time. Not because one group earned more, but because one group acted earlier. This is where the real problem begins. Not lack of money, but lack of urgency. Two people can have the same savings and live completely different financial futures, depending on one thing: awareness of the gap. Take two individuals earning the same income with similar savings. One feels comfortable enough, so they delay increasing contributions. Life feels manageable, so there is no pressure to change. The other quietly runs the numbers and realizes something uncomfortable. What they have is not enough to maintain their current lifestyle long-term. That discomfort changes behavior immediately. They adjust savings, reduce delay, act faster, and over time, that single difference compounds into a massive financial gap. Not because of income, because of timing. The real danger in your 50s is not ignorance. It is delayed awareness. Because once you feel safe, your brain stops pushing for change, even if the math says otherwise. And that false calm becomes expensive over time. The second major trap is what I call lifestyle cement. By your 50s, your spending is no longer just spending. It becomes identity. Your home, your car, your routines, even your social habits are no longer flexible choices. They are expectations, both internal and external. And expectations are hard to reduce without emotional resistance. That's why cutting expenses is not a simple financial decision anymore. It feels like personal loss. Even when logic says it's necessary, emotion resists it. This is where most people stay stuck, because they can see what needs to change, but they cannot tolerate what it feels like to change it. So they delay, and delay keeps the structure intact, even when it is financially harmful. The problem is not that people cannot cut costs. The problem is that their identity is tied to keeping them. Then comes the hidden danger most people never think about: sequence risk. It is not just how much money you have. It is when bad events happen. Two people can retire with the same savings, same withdrawal rate, same plan. But if one retires into a strong market and the other into a downturn, their outcomes diverge dramatically. The early years decide everything. because losses at the start of retirement reduce the base that future growth depends on. That means recovery becomes weaker, even if the average returns over time are identical. This is why timing matters more than most people realize. And it is also why relying on average returns is dangerous at this stage. Because averages don't protect you from bad timing. Only buffers do. Cash reserves, liquidity, time flexibility. These are what protect your retirement from randomness. Not optimism. But even if you solve the financial side, there is another risk that quietly destroys many retirements: identity collapse. Most people don't realize how much of their identity is tied to their work. Job title, routine, responsibility, structure, social value. When that disappears, something unexpected happens. A loss of direction. Not financial loss, psychological loss. And that loss creates instability faster than market crashes ever could. Because the brain needs purpose to function properly. Without it, structure collapses from the inside. This is why retirement can feel surprisingly heavy for many people, even when they are financially secure. They expected freedom, but what they feel is emptiness, which is why planning for retirement is not just about money. It is about building a new structure for your identity before the old one disappears. Without that, even a strong financial position can feel unstable. Most people underestimate how much their identity depends on structure, not freedom. When work disappears, the calendar opens up, but the mind doesn't always know what to do with that space. And that's where the problem starts. Because without structure, time doesn't feel free. It feels empty. At first, retirement feels like relief. No deadlines, no pressure, no obligations. But after a while, something changes. The absence of structure becomes noticeable. Days start blending together. And without something meaningful to replace work, the mind begins to lose direction. This is why some people age faster after retirement. Not physically, but mentally. Because purpose was never replaced. And when purpose disappears, health and energy often follow. Financial planning usually stops at income. But real retirement stability requires something deeper, a reason to stay engaged with life. Another hidden issue is what happens when income stops, but lifestyle expectations don't. Even with savings, many people continue living as if their previous income still exists. That mismatch slowly drains financial reserves, not through one big mistake, but through repeated small justifications. I've earned this. I deserve a bit more comfort now. It won't make a difference. Individually, these decisions feel harmless, but together, they change the entire trajectory of retirement savings. Because retirement success is not only about how much you have, it's about how slowly you spend it. And that requires awareness, not just discipline. Without awareness, spending always expands to match comfort, even when income no longer supports expansion. This is where many retirement plans quietly begin to fail. Not from crisis, but from comfort. There's also a timing mistake many people make in their 50s. They assume they can fix things later. Later is the most expensive financial strategy in existence. Because later always arrives with less time and fewer options. Every year you delay adjustment reduces the compounding window. And compounding is not linear. It is exponential. That means early action is disproportionately powerful. A small correction today is worth far more than a large correction later. But the human brain is not wired for this type of thinking. It prefers urgency over consistency. And in finance, that preference is costly because wealth is not built in moments of urgency. It is built in years of steady alignment. The longer you wait for motivation, the more expensive the correction becomes. At this stage of life, financial clarity becomes more important than financial optimism. Optimism says things will work out. Clarity shows what actually happens if nothing changes. And those are usually very different outcomes. Clarity removes emotional guessing. It replaces it with numbers, income, expenses, savings, time horizon. Once those numbers are visible, decisions become easier, even if uncomfortable. Because uncertainty is what creates anxiety, not the numbers themselves. This is why many people feel relief after finally facing their finances honestly. Not because the situation is perfect, but because it is now known, and what is known can be managed. What is avoided cannot. The final realization in this stage is simple but powerful. Financial stability is not about income growth anymore. It is about dependency reduction, because dependency is what limits freedom in later life. If your expenses require constant income to survive, then you are not financially free. You are financially active. And activity is fragile in retirement. But when dependency decreases, flexibility increases. And flexibility is what allows real retirement stability. That might mean downsizing, reducing fixed costs, simplifying lifestyle, or removing financial obligations that no longer serve long-term goals. None of these changes feel exciting in the moment, but they create something far more valuable than excitement: control. And control is what determines whether your 50s feel stable or stressful. By your 50s, the real financial challenge is no longer about earning more. It is about correcting direction before time runs out. Because at this stage, small inefficiencies no longer stay small. They accumulate faster and they last longer. Every financial decision now carries more weight than it did in your 30s or 40s. Not because money is more important, but because time is shorter. And when time shortens, mistakes become harder to repair. This is where many people feel a quiet pressure they cannot fully explain. They're still working, still earning, still functioning normally, but something feels slightly off. That feeling is usually the first sign that lifestyle and long-term financial reality are no longer aligned. And alignment is what determines whether the next decade feels stable or stressful. One of the biggest hidden shifts in this stage is that income stops being freedom and starts becoming maintenance. At earlier stages of life, income feels like expansion. More money means more options. But in your 50s, income often becomes a tool to maintain commitments already made. Mortgage payments, lifestyle expenses, family obligations, health costs. Instead of creating freedom, income starts preserving structure. And that changes how financial stress feels. Because now, even good income doesn't necessarily reduce pressure. It just keeps things stable. That's why many people in this stage feel busy but not free. They are not failing financially. They are maintaining too much financial weight. This is also where the illusion of later adjustment becomes dangerous. Many people believe they can restructure everything once retirement is closer. But financial systems don't reset easily. They carry inertia. Spending habits continue. Lifestyle expectations remain. And dependency doesn't disappear on its own. So what happens is delay turns into permanence. Not because change is impossible, but because it gets harder with every passing year. That's why financial correction is most powerful when done early in this stage. Even small changes now have amplified effects later, because they influence not just numbers, but trajectory. And trajectory is what determines outcomes more than effort. At this point, clarity becomes more valuable than confidence. Confidence says, "I'll manage somehow." Clarity asks, what exactly will happen if I don't change anything? And that question is uncomfortable, but necessary. Because clarity removes emotional distortion. It shows the real gap between current savings and future needs. And once that gap is visible, the illusion of safety fades quickly. But that's not a bad thing, because false safety delays action. Real awareness creates it. This is the moment where many people finally shift from passive financial thinking to active financial correction. Not because they suddenly feel motivated, but because they finally understand the structure they are inside. And once that understanding arrives, the focus naturally shifts from income to dependency. Because income alone does not guarantee stability. Dependency determines how fragile your system is. The more obligations you carry, the more income you need just to stay still. That's why reducing dependency becomes one of the most powerful financial moves in your 50s. Not glamorous, not exciting, but extremely effective. Every reduced expense is not just savings. It is future freedom added back into your system. And every eliminated dependency increases flexibility, which is the real foundation of financial security at this stage. Because in the end, stability is not about how much you earn. It is about how little you need to maintain control over your life. At this stage, one of the most important financial truths becomes unavoidable. Stability is not created by income, but by margin. Margin is the space between what you earn and what you are forced to spend. And in your 50s, that margin becomes your real safety system. Because without margin, even high income feels fragile. Every unexpected cost becomes pressure. Every delay in income becomes stress. But with margin, life becomes flexible again. And flexibility is what creates real financial control. This is why people with lower expenses but higher margin often feel calmer than high earners with no breathing room. It is not about how much money enters your life. It is about how much remains unclaimed by obligations. Another shift happens quietly in this decade. Risk tolerance changes without permission. What felt manageable at 35 suddenly feels heavy at 55. Financial uncertainty, job pressure, market volatility, all of it feels more intense. Not because the world changed, but because recovery time has shortened. At 30, a mistake feels recoverable. At 55, it feels consequential. That psychological shift is important because it changes how decisions should be made. But many people don't adjust their strategy accordingly. They continue operating with younger risk assumptions in an older time horizon. And that mismatch creates unnecessary stress. Because risk itself is not the problem. Unmatched risk is. This is also the stage where financial illusions become most expensive. Because small leaks that were tolerable earlier now matter more. A few unnecessary subscriptions, a slightly oversized home, a lifestyle that no longer matches real needs. Individually, none of these break a system, but together, they slowly reduce future freedom. And because they feel normal, they go unnoticed. That is what makes them dangerous. Not their size, but their invisibility. Financial decline in this stage is rarely dramatic. It is gradual. And what is gradual often feels harmless until it is too late to easily reverse. One of the hardest truths to accept in your 50s is that stability requires subtraction before addition. Most people think improvement means adding more income, more investments, more effort. But at this stage, addition without subtraction creates overload. Because every added expense, responsibility, or commitment increases long-term pressure. That is why simplifying life often produces better financial outcomes than trying to optimize everything. Simplification reduces decision load, reduces cost, reduces dependency, and most importantly, it restores control. Because control does not come from complexity. It comes from clarity and reduction of unnecessary weight. At some point, you begin to realize something fundamental. You're not just managing money anymore. You are managing time that has already been partially spent. That realization changes everything. Because time becomes the real currency behind every financial decision. Every expense is no longer just money spent. It is time that will need to be replaced or supported later. And that reframes every choice. Do I really need this? Does this increase my future freedom or reduce it? Does this create dependency or remove it? When those questions become part of your thinking, financial behavior starts to shift naturally. Not through pressure, but through awareness. And awareness is what turns survival-based decisions into strategic ones. At this stage of life, one truth becomes increasingly clear. Your financial future is no longer shaped by big decisions, but by accumulated habits. Not the dramatic moments, not the sudden changes, but the repeated patterns that have been running silently for years. And by your 50s, those patterns have already built most of your financial structure. That's why change feels harder now. Not because it's impossible, but because momentum is already established. Money behavior becomes self-reinforcing. If spending has been the default, it keeps expanding. If saving has been consistent, it keeps compounding. The system you built earlier in life doesn't disappear, it just continues running. And now you're living inside the result of it. One of the most overlooked realities in this decade is that financial pressure is rarely caused by one problem. It is usually caused by many small ones stacking together. A slightly high cost of living, a few unnecessary obligations, delayed adjustments, lifestyle habits that no longer match income flexibility. Individually, they seem manageable, but combined, they quietly reduce your financial breathing room. And when breathing room disappears, even normal life starts feeling stressful. This is why many people don't feel poor in their 50s, but still feel pressure. It is not lack of money. It is lack of margin. There is also a psychological trap that becomes stronger at this stage. Comfort with delay. People begin to believe there is still time to adjust later. But later always arrives with less flexibility than before. Because obligations do not pause. Expenses do not shrink automatically. And time does not slow down. So delay creates a compounding disadvantage. Not immediately visible, but structurally powerful. That is why small changes made now carry far more weight than large changes made later. Because time amplifies consistency more than intensity. And consistency requires starting before motivation arrives. As people begin to face this reality, something important happens. The emotional attachment to lifestyle begins to weaken. What once felt essential starts to feel optional. Not because life changes suddenly, but because perspective changes. You begin to see the difference between what supports your life and what only supports an image of your life. And that distinction is powerful. Because much of financial pressure comes from maintaining identity, not necessity. Once that becomes visible, decisions become clearer. What to keep, what to reduce, what to let go. And every unnecessary layer removed creates immediate financial relief. Not just in money, but in mental space. At this point, the focus naturally shifts from accumulation to resilience. Because wealth alone is not enough if it cannot adapt. Real financial strength is not how much you have, but how well your system survives change. Job loss, market shifts, health changes, family responsibilities. Uncertainty is not an exception in life, it is a constant. And resilience is what determines whether uncertainty becomes a disruption or a collapse. That is why the most important financial goal in your 50s is not growth. It is stability under pressure. Because stability is what allows everything else to function. And without it, even large numbers can feel fragile. At this stage, something fundamental becomes clear. Stability is not about having more, it is about needing less. Because the more your life depends on a high level of income, the more fragile it becomes. And fragility increases stress, even when income is strong. That's why many people in their 50s discover a strange truth. Reducing expenses often creates more freedom than increasing income. Every removed obligation is not just financial relief, it is future protection. Because fewer obligations mean fewer points of failure. And fewer points of failure mean more control when life becomes unpredictable. This is where real financial strength begins. Not in expansion, but in simplification. Another shift happens when people stop thinking in terms of earning years and start thinking in terms of remaining years. That change is subtle, but powerful. Because suddenly, every financial decision carries a time dimension. Not just cost, but duration. How long will this commitment last? How long will this expense continue? How long will I need to sustain this structure? When time becomes part of the calculation, decisions become more serious. Because time is the only resource that cannot be recovered. And in your 50s, time becomes more valuable than money itself. This is also the point where clarity becomes more important than optimism. Optimism says things will work out. Clarity shows what happens if nothing changes. And clarity is uncomfortable, but necessary. Because only clarity removes denial. And denial is what delays correction. Once the real numbers are visible, decisions stop being emotional guesses and become structural responses. You stop asking, do I feel okay about this? And start asking, does this support my future stability? That shift alone can completely change financial direction over time. At this stage, financial resilience becomes the real goal, not growth for its own sake. Because resilience determines how well your system survives disruption. Not just income disruption, but life disruption, health events, market downturns, unexpected responsibilities. These are not rare exceptions. They're normal parts of life. And the only protection against them is flexibility, liquidity, low dependency, and simple structure. The more flexible your system is, the less damage any single event can cause. That is why resilience quietly becomes more valuable than accumulation in this decade of life. In the end, financial reality in your 50s comes down to one simple truth. Your future is shaped not by what you plan, but by what you consistently maintain. Not big decisions, not rare events, but repeated behavior over time. Do you save automatically or inconsistently? Do you reduce dependency or increase it? Do you face reality or delay it? These small patterns compound into the life you experience later. And by this stage, there is no longer enough time for repeated correction, only alignment. And alignment requires action now, not intention later. Because every year of delay reduces flexibility, while every year of discipline restores it. So the real question is no longer what you understand. It is what you are willing to change starting today.